Welcome to Invisible Machines, a podcast where we explore the expanding world of AI agents and conversational technologies. I'm Josh Tyson, co-author of Age of Invisible Machines, a best-selling book all about the agentic approach to automation and the pursuit of organizational AGI. I'm joined each week by Robb Wilson, CEO and co-founder of OneReach.ai. Robb and I wrote Age of Invisible Machines over countless hours of conversation, much like the ones that we have each week on this podcast. Robb has spent decades researching and deploying conversational technologies, and Invisible Machines is where we share these big ideas with fellow AI insiders. We're continuing these conversations in partnership with UX Magazine because attention to experience design is mission critical to the proper deployment of AI agents, or invisible machines. This week on Invisible Machines, we're having a conversation with Ed Klaris, the managing partner at Klaris Law and CEO of KlarisIP. Ed has years of experience with copyright and IP law surrounding technology, having served as in-house counsel for ABC Disney. He was also senior vice president at Condé Nast, working extensively with publications like Vogue, Vanity Fair, Wired, and GQ. Ed has contributed to several books, including 3 chapters in the American Bar Association's Intellectual Property and Technology Due Diligence, and he is also an adjunct professor at Columbia Law School. Robb and I have been very eager to have a conversation about how IP and copyright law will impact and be impacted by generative AI like LLMs, as well as tools that generate images and video. We're still waiting for a landmark decision that will determine the fate of these tools and what Ed argues is the stolen content that giant tech companies used to create them. So these powerful models, they are quickly changing the world around us. So enjoy this very timely conversation with Ed Klaris. Invisible Machines is produced for UX Magazine in partnership with OneReach.ai. Named a leader by every major analyst group, OneReach.ai's Generative Studio X platform was built specifically to facilitate the no-code orchestration of AI agents. GSX is trusted by global giants like PepsiCo, PwC, Deloitte, and DHL, but anyone can experience the level of agent orchestration we talk about on this podcast through interactive demos at OneReach.ai. Now, on with the show. Well, Ed, thanks so much for joining us. We're really excited to have you here on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Robb, it's a pleasure as always seeing you.
Good to see you, Josh.
Right. Well, Ed, we have a lot that we could talk about, but we thought maybe to start us off, it might be good, since you've spent so many years working with media and technology, to talk a little bit about where we are in terms of what people are concerned about with copyright law, and maybe what's been decided that's kind of starting to shape how this might look in the future.
Yeah, and also just on a scale, how big is this moment for copyright? How is this overblown? Is this a big pivotal moment we're in, or what?
These are great questions. I actually think that the questions require me to step back a little bit in history, because
Let's do that.
technology has delivered content from and captured content since early days. Not the earliest days. The earliest days you had kind of a quill, and that was it. Your tool, the quill. And
I remember those days, Josh. Remember those days?
Yeah, my quilling days.
And even the
Not
pencil. You always had you've had a tool to help you deliver content for a long time. And in the late 1800s, there was actually a Supreme Court case on whether capturing content on a camera was copyrightable, whether there was any author at all. And the Supreme Court decided that just the fact that a machine came between the person and the content creation didn't take away the authorship.
Yeah, I was thinking from here, and camera obscura, okay, where do you draw the line? Yeah. This makes
Right.
sense.
Right, because one could argue that the camera was making it, and it was the author.
Yeah.
And you can extrapolate to what you can do now with cameras, where you can have a motion sensor in your camera in the forest, waiting for the cute little bear to come with a cub, and have a photograph or have a video that's captured with no human being any place in sight, and still the prevailing view is that what's captured is copyrightable, and it's offered to the person who set the camera up. And in the old days, when the camera was used, you had to like put a hood over your head, and you had to take a lot of time to get the filter right, the color, the light filter, and the focus bright, the shutter speed, and
Right.
it took a lot to take a photo.
Yeah.
And as we all know, now the camera is on your phone, and you can take 1,000 images a minute.
Right.
So in all of that, you've got the advancement of technology with the motion sensors and the camera on the phone. You've got ease of creation. But bottom line is, we rely on technology in many ways.
Right.
And beyond photographing, we use CGI to make our movies. We use CGI for years. We deliver our content by way of PowerPoint and Excel, or not Excel as much, but Word, and we have tools. We have a huge number of tools that we use that are used at our discretion and in our control largely. And AI is pushing that envelope a little bit further in terms of like, what does it really mean to partner with AI in content, and to what extent is AI generating content really on its own, and what is AI using in its training data to be able to create content. And so I think that this conversation is just like very timely among us and among sort of a world of worried people that they're taken. And I think that are we going to get to a place where we're getting comfortable with AI, or are we going to get more resistant to it? Is the United States moving in a direction that's different than Japan and Europe and other countries? We can talk about that. But technology creates some anxiety on one side and some opportunity on another. And I think it's just a fascinating topic.
Yeah. So it sounds like at the moment, this has been there, done that. Like, this is autofocus. It's just the trajectory we've been on, where machines are just making it easier and easier to use these tools. But at the end of the day, someone paid the bill on operating that tool, whether it was the electricity that went into it, the equipment itself, somebody manned it, and whatever it produced belongs to them. But there is some weird thing where I think you said you can't protect text that comes out of an LLM in our last conversation, which is kind of that's different, right? Or is that?
Well, it's not just text. It could be a movie
or images, right?
It could be a song. It could be a still photograph or an illustration, or it could be text. As of right now, the U.S. Copyright Office has decided that any content that is created by a large language model algorithm is not protected by copyright, because it doesn't involve a human being in the generation of the content. And there is a lot of controversy around that. Other countries are not necessarily taking that point of view. And they're taking the point of view that generative AI is owned by and authored by, for copyright purposes, the party that was in control of the machine at the time.
Yeah, because you could see like feeding an outline for a short story, or even like fragments of a short story to an LLM, and then having it finish it for you. And then maybe you, as a writer, you then apply kind of a final edit to it. And then it does get kind of murky. Like who did the writing, whose ideas are being represented? Is there a style and technique that's being borrowed? It becomes really difficult to say.
That's right. Those are all really good points. And the Copyright Office in the U.S. does have a provision where if you have a kind of a collaborative process, you need to be able to identify in your copyright registration what exactly was created by you as a human and what was created by. They'll only protect the material that's certified to have been created by a human being, which I think is a pretty unworkable standard. But that's
that seems so unwieldy. Like, this pixel was me, that pixel was it.
Yeah, it just doesn't make sense.
What the heck? Yeah.
And it doesn't feel like a real solution. So I think
So what drives them to, like, it seems out of step from the logic. What drives them to say this is not protected? Was it, well, like, it almost seems rash to me.
It feels really rash to me. It feels like we're only a year and a half or 2 years in on the development of generative AI in a real way. And for the Copyright Office to take such a proactive stance feels rash. Why are they doing it? I think probably because, well, the clause 1, Article 1, Clause 8 of the U.S. Constitution is the copyright clause. And it's basically included in the Constitution in order to incentivize the creation of copyrightable and patentable material. So it's a monopoly. Copyright is a monopoly. You own it for your lifetime plus 70 years. So it's a really long time. And after that, content falls into the public domain. And the public domain is the place where anybody can use it and anybody can copy it. And so public policy supports more material falling into the public domain. And the Copyright Office has taken the position that if a machine-generated content, it doesn't lead to incentivizing the creation of more content because machines don't need to be incentivized. They're programmed.
Right.
And so why put that much material behind the monopoly protected wall? Why not contribute all that to the public domain and make it ownership everybody? Why do we need so many monopolies? Which has some initial appeal.
Yeah. It kind of makes sense. Like, it says this was to protect humans and encourage innovation and authorship, and we don't need to incent machines, like you said. So this is and trying to police this stuff costs money. So why would we do this? There's something else that just hit me, which is because it's machine generated, right? And humans have this like limited throughput, but AI, although limited, has a much higher throughput. And so I almost imagine, like, could I create almost any combination of text and then copyright it? And then basically anytime anybody writes a letter or publishes anything, almost like buying up all the domain names, before, like, could I generate, spend $1 billion and just generate, any combination of text? And I don't know, now that I think about it, I think you probably couldn't generate enough. But, is that feasible that you could generate all the popular sentences and paragraphs and then suddenly that would become a real problem where...
Yeah, I don't know if all the possible combinations of phrases and visuals can possibly be created to...
Yeah.
I think that's less of the concern than this question of incentivizing content creation and this question of what should be monopolized, and whether it's better to have more stuff in the public domain. My point of view is, on the one hand, I think there are many problems with the copyright scheme. It used to be that copyrights only lasted 28 years. And that was like a period of time when the original Copyright Act thought that's enough time to monetize your investment in content. And 28 years then became 56 years. And And then 56 years went up from there. And now we're at, a lifetime plus 70, which can be as many as 130, 140 years. So, and oftentimes we talk the duration of copyright as like the Disney duration. Like Disney has had the big media companies have had a big impact on extending copyright because they want to make money on their stuff for as long as they possibly can. But does that really incentivize? So I think that by taking AI generated content out of protection so rashly, as we said, we're probably trying to solve a problem that was created another way because of duration and not because of the ownership question.
Got it.
I think that the Copyright Office is probably resenting the duration issue, and so they're trying to find and I don't think that's really a smart way to get to policy. And I think that there's a lot of human beings behind this AI, and it's wonderful in terms of a tool to help you generate and to refine what you've generated and to think of new ideas and to even maybe come up with ideas. So I think that we're just too soon, because what it's going to be able to do in terms of productivity is probably fantastic, and we should be incentivizing people to collaborate with their tools, not to stay away from their tools or lie about how much they're collaborating.
Right.
Yeah, and we're in this weird moment too, where all these copyrights that have been around for so long are starting to lapse, right? Like I think it was Mickey Mouse and Winnie the Pooh, or at least an iteration of Mickey Mouse.
Exactly.
And then the first thing you usually see, or at least that I've noticed, is like there's already a horror movie that's been created that's being like waiting in the wings for when that lapses, and then they release it. Which is funny because horror movies are generally a place that like first time filmmakers will go because there aren't a lot of rules and you can do things cheaply and creatively. So it sort of begs the question are we at this weird intersection where now there's like these AI tools and you have these things coming out of copyright protection where there's a huge amount of material on, like what this thing might look like, what it might say, what it might do. And you could start seeing a moment where these strange creations just erupt rapidly all around us that are just taking advantage of elapsed copyright and really cheap tools to kind of create sort of a strange little cultural piece.
Right. And we don't even have to judge it because potentially it could be really cool.
Right.
It could be like amazing stuff coming out of what is public domain into new material. We see a lot of people wanting to create fan fiction around their favorite, material, their favorite books, their favorite comics, their favorite video games, their favorite movies. Their fan fiction or fan generated content is massive and largely tolerated by most original authors, even though when they are in copyright, as long as the efforts by the fans are not commercial. As soon as the fans turn their stuff into a commercial opportunity, usually the underlying author will come after them. So I don't know. I think that there's something really cool about fan-generated content.
Yeah. I was reading about Shenzhen and, the sort of China culture around IP or lack thereof, really. It just seems like no one can protect anything and nothing's protected. And I think a lot of the times we think like they're stealing our ideas, but they're stealing each other's. Like it's just a free for all. There are no, there just is a culture of if, you make something, you go to somebody to build it, then they'll just knock it off like 2 days later. And they said, there's one way to look at it, like the diversity and innovation is just a super rapid fire pace there. On the other hand, this idea that there's not much money in being innovative and creative, has to come from proof that protecting artists is better. for the society as a whole, right? As a whole. Is that like a decided thing, or is that still an argued thing about whether this is better for society or not?
I mean, it's a great question. I think you're probably right. Why is the United States, why is 40% of our GDP generated from IP? Why are we so dominant in the world when it comes to making copyrighted material? And you're probably right. It's a lot to do with this like legal structure that allows for people to not just create, but to really be able to police and enforce their rights so that they make big money on what it's like when young people see older people making bank on songs and videos and stuff, they want to do it too. It's like incentive.
Right.
It's just like this. You look up to it, just like everybody wants to play basketball like Michael Jordan. I mean, yeah, we all have hoop dreams, and that just has this like very positive effect. Is that good? I'm not really sure if that's good. There's probably a lot of negative to that, right? I mean, people fail. A lot of people fail. There are societies where authorship is not even valued. I mean, especially in women's writing culture in the 1800s, when they weren't able to publish, they would oftentimes publish anonymously or under somebody else's name. And yet they created great stuff. But I think we're creating better stuff than China because we're probably able to protect it.
So we treated women back then like AIs, basically. Whatever they wrote couldn't be protected, so they had to write it in a guy's name. Is that what you're saying?
That happened a lot. Yeah,
that's crazy.
You could look at it in a fully negative way like that, which is fine because I think it's true. Or you can look at it as like women historically didn't have a need for authorship, didn't have a need to themselves, and that women are okay working in groups with like not named. It's very, it depends on how you look at it.
Yeah. I think I'd have to, just off the cuff, settle on incentives work. I think as humans, incentives work. And if they didn't, then capitalism and so many things that seems to work, taxes, a lot of this stuff wouldn't work. And so I'm kind of on the side of incentives are core to why we do the things we do. And if you want innovation, you have to incentivize it. And if you don't, you're not going to get it. And I know there's people that would argue and say, no, you'll get it anyway. But that would just be them probably having to show that there's some other incentive that's inherently there. And I would say, well, okay, but more incentive is better. So
incentive being like ability to make a lot of money, and then the aspiration of other people who see you making the money. I think that creates this really
good point. The mimetic component of it, of inspiring other people as well, is huge. Yeah.
When we were preparing for this chat, we stumbled upon something called the Statute of Anne, which was passed by Parliament in Great Britain in the 1700s. And it was, I think, one of the first examples of copyright law. But what was really interesting is, there's maybe sort of this notion that the law is there to protect the little guy or protect the artist. But it was really sort of what we're describing. It was in their national interest in these kind of ongoing culture wars with their neighboring European countries to attract the most, the brightest people they could find who were producing ideas. And so incentivizing them was a way to draw them in. And so it wasn't necessarily, very, very tied to necessarily protecting the artist.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and it seems like, as you've put it, 40% of GDP being driven by IP. Some part of me is just like, why don't, as an economist, like in our government, why isn't that a bigger deal? That seems like a IP is sort of a side conversation versus like the center of one of the most Like we talk about healthcare, that's a huge driver of cost. And we focus a lot on the cost of government spending, but what about the income side, the P side, you know, and if that's a huge piece of it, then rash decisions on copyright seems crazy, like even more crazy. To like making rash decisions on something that's 40% of GDP seems nuts, even more irresponsible.
No, I 100% agree. And now look, copyright is not the entirety of what makes up the IP, right? Patents also.
True.
But and patents are a bigger piece than copyright in net.
Okay.
There's also trademark. But the bottom line is your point around incentives. One of the reasons why I think the Copyright Office's decision to make AI-generated works not copyrightable and really being pretty stringent about it is a problem, is that it takes away the incentive to partner with a new technology. And it takes away the value of that partnership. And if we're going to be incentivized to partner with the technology and allow it to work with us as a tool, generate content, then it's not going to develop in a way that I think it could. And that to me is unfortunate.
Yeah. It's almost like protecting painters from photographers, you know? Hey, we're like, well, because there's more painters, we're going to look out, like picking one artist over another. Kind of preferential treatment of artists in a way, because it's
protection of the original people.
Right. And the net effect is you're not an artist if you use AI. What?
Yeah.
Wait a second. And that makes sense. Like we don't want that. You know, we want more artists, not less artists.
Right. Well, and I think before the statute of Anne, part of the problem was that the people who owned the printing presses were usually the ones deciding what got printed. So they were sort of the gatekeepers of information. So even if you wrote something transformative, those words might not make it out of the world just because you hand them off to a typesetter. And so that feels somewhat related to these AI tools. Like you're not allowed, like what's the incentive to bring your work to a printing press? What's the incentive to like use AI to enhance your work if it suddenly makes it into something that you can't say is yours?
Well, then that starts to raise a different issue, Josh, which is, you know, what's the AI using as its training data create the generative work? So, you know, what we've talked about so far is authorship, is the value of technology, is incentives. And then there's this question about like, okay, all of that's said and done, but what are these tools and what are they built? And that's just that separate piece that I think is really important, which we should get to, because therein lies what I consider to be the real injustice, or at least real injustice, which is that companies, in order to build their large language models, have stolen content owned by others, copywriters, put it into their training data in order to make their system smarter. And I have to say, it might be a little bit, one might argue that I'm being schoolmarmy, like I'm being afraid of technology, but I'm not. I actually applaud the technology. I think it's fantastic. But we also know that it would have been relatively easy for them to license that content. They're doing it now with many people. And the right to put it into their systems, do it perhaps a little bit slower, but appropriately. And so...
Yeah, is there any precedent for that? Is there anything that's like historically similar to this scenario? Like, I don't know, I think about fonts or something like that where, you know, because we know fonts are well protected, right? And the printing press used fonts. So is there something historically that might give us a signal of where this is going?
Well, I'd say that perhaps the closest analogy I can think of is the Google Books case. So Google Books,
Yeah, that makes sense.
12 years ago or so,
Yeah.
maybe a little bit longer ago, they scanned like 20 million books that were in copyright, provided to them by libraries and other places. So 20 million in copyright books scanned without permission and put into their database. They argued, well, we're not using the books as books, we're using them as snippets so people can find the books or that they can know that the books exist, providing a public service to be able to know that they're out there and to see what a little tiny snippet. And so we're not infringing the right, we're actually elevating it. We're putting us on it. And if anybody wants to read the book, they can, and at least they know it exists. And so that's probably the closest analogy to what we have here. Instead of 20 million books, the LLMs have scraped, I don't even know, I can't even begin to say how much they've scraped. But
Right. Probably including those books.
Far in excess of 20 million books.
Yeah.
And they've done so again without permission. They've taken copyrighted works and copied them into their database, just like Google did. And Google, it didn't go to the Supreme Court. It was in a appellate federal court in New York, said that ultimately Google had not infringed and was engaging in a fair use. And so if we have a sort of a precedent, if that's the most natural precedent or the nearest one, then the LLMs might be feeling pretty confident that, like Google, what they're doing is okay.
Well, the volume of information too, it dilutes it to a point where it becomes harder and harder to find those pieces of copywritten material, right? Like the New York Times, I think they were able to like see phrases that were copied directly, but it just gets harder and harder, right? As these models grow. I can see
two sides of this, but I'd love to hear your opinion. One side is that Google's going to reproduce this and source it so that you can buy the book. And an LLM has, was inspired by the book, but there's no trace to the book necessarily. So who's going to buy that book? But on the other hand, taking much bigger chunks of it verbatim. So where does that balancing act?
So in terms of like the ingest, I think it's equal. And then the question, what you said, is it different because Google was using it as a search tool for just showing snippets to let you know that it exists, that you could go buy the book? I think that that's the real distinction here. And that's where the unfairness comes, because LLMs are outputting, basically supplanting the market, creating new products, new summaries and new outlines and new ideas that all use the underlying copyrighted material, making it less and less needed to actually read that stuff, and providing the same kind of service. They're informing, entertaining in the same way. They're using the same stream of commerce as the copyright holder.
We'll probably start to see LLMs look more like citing the original just to try to fit more into that case, to look more like, a duck. And so I've begun to see that actually where citing is becoming more of a thing.
When LLMs start to credit, I'll put them in a better place. And I think the answer is no. Just the fact that they're crediting the material that they stole doesn't mean that it somehow launders the theft.
Okay.
And in fact, it might exacerbate the problem, because the copyright owner might not have wanted them, doesn't want to be associated. feels like the fact that they're being credited makes it seem to the public that they've cooperated, when in fact they have. So I don't think that changes anything. There is, there many of the plaintiffs in these cases, like the New York Times and others who've sued, have argued that by stripping out certain metadata from the files, the Copyright Act has also been infringed. And a cool argument that we don't need to go into here, but it really doesn't have to do with the actual on-screen crediting. I think, no question, a party who uses an LLM, incorporates material into their output, and puts it out into the world, if there's infringement there, they're going to be held liable for copyright infringement.
As well. Is it both, or? Yeah.
Both. Yeah. And everybody downstream will be as well. They're all going to be responsible unless somebody behind them has indemnified them or held them harmless against infringement. And that wouldn't be a copyright question. It's more of a contract question. And I don't know of a single LLM that's indemnifying people for outputs.
Got it. So that's interesting. That kind of brings us to that Air Canada thing, where I think somebody was asking if there was a bereavement policy, and they'd get, I don't know the case, but it sounded pretty interesting. It came back and said, yes, there is, you'll get a, you'll get a refund or whatever, your flight's free or whatever it was. Or I think it was a flight change for free or something like that. And then, of course, that was a hallucination. It was not their policy. And there was a lawsuit around that. Ultimately, this is sort of like outside of copyright now. Now we're moving to like an LLM hallucinating who's responsible, the party who wrapped it, the LLM provider. Like, does Air Canada go sue OpenAI? Like, what happens?
Yeah. Well, I've dealt with a lot of clients who do deals with LLMs to help them do work. Cool. And like probably Air Canada did with whatever chatbot that they licensed. And it's really hard in those negotiations, impossible, in fact, for at least from my experience, to get the licensor of the algorithm to indemnify you against any output that possibly comes out of it. It just doesn't really, you can't get them because they know that there's hallucinations still, and they're going to protect against any kind of liability in that regard. On the other side, I'm dealing with some people who are licensing their voice and their knowledge bank, whatever that knowledge bank might be, their books and their teachings and their other material levels, and they're asking the LLMs to indemnify them for any use of their content in the LLM on output. And in those cases, I'm finding that you can get the LLM to take responsibility.
Got it. That makes sense. Yeah, they wouldn't want to be liable for some use of their content that they have no control over. Yep. Interesting. I think the most interesting thing to me is that if copyright infringement sort of falls on the side of the originator of this work, that everybody downstream that's benefited from it is responsible. What's your take on how much the world should care about that in terms of organizations?
Well, I think that people really need to begin to create standards for cooperating with AI. In other words, there are anti-piracy tools that people can use in order to check their work, and they should. There are engines that you can put if you're going to use AI to help you with your school essay or your work memo, there are tools that you can use to check if there's plagiarism. First, reverse image searching that you can do on an image to make sure that that image isn't already out in the world. People are going to need to get more sophisticated around checking their work, and they are getting more. Kids now know that in order to avoid getting stuck on plagiarism from an you're capable, but you basically have the way I understand the kids are doing it these days in order to spoof the teachers is they have something created by AI, and then they put it into another AI engine and they get an output from that. And then since it's sort of been laundered through the two of them, they have like a less chance that anybody's going to track it.
Right. That makes sense. From a mathematics standpoint, that makes sense. You're creating an output, and then it's going to generate further problematic text.
Yeah.
Probabilistic text, rather not problematic. And that's just going to kind of create more entropy and mix up the words.
Right. There are tools that are doing this. They actually mix the AI systems. So things are getting much more sophisticated that way.
Right.
Still think that from an ethics point of view and from following the rules point of view, people need to be more careful.
Right.
Plagiarism, about checking the veracity of things so that they're not using hallucinated information.
Yeah.
Yeah,
one of the things you just said too, I think, is worth pointing out, and that just because it came out of an LLM doesn't make it original.
Exactly. Or correct.
Or true, yeah.
Or correct, yeah, or true. Yeah. So fact-checking LLMs, I think we all knew that, but the fact that it could be word for word infringing, I think many of us kind of expected that it was not that, and I think what you're saying is there's nothing to say that you can count on that.
Not at all, right? Especially when you're getting to the photographs or visual stuff. All the words. I mean, in both cases, it's pretty easy for the AI to output something that is exactly what the original was.
Interesting.
So could there be decisions around copyright law in the coming years that could destabilize these giant tech companies entirely? Because it feels like one decision going one way could really run right up the chain into the model and really start costing them a lot of money or changing the way that they have to monetize or, I guess, please their shareholders.
Yeah. I mean, I think that it's almost mind-boggling to think about what would happen should the big cases come out against the AI companies, right? Because then you'd have to somehow figure out how to extract the content that was improperly put in, but also to somehow reverse all of the learning from that content. Near impossible to do that. And I can't, it's hard to imagine that courts will order these companies to, do away with all the learning that has happened since the content was put in there.
Wow. Yeah, it almost seems like any country, like the first thing that would happen is, almost a ban of the use of LLMs. And then become illegal to use until this is figured out. And then it seems like the next, even if they're not illegal, it's still the legal risk of using them is so high. And then you go to countries that solve this problem, having a competitive advantage in a significant way. Because, what's interesting to me is the input is copywritten, the output is still creative, itself. And so now the question is, if the idea is to have more original content, which way delivers more original and innovative content, having LLMs or not having LLMs,
Out on that one. I don't think LLMs have created anything of real value yet. Like, it's not as if the great American novel is being written by LLMs at this point.
Right.
Really, fairly long way away. The more, I think, appropriate way of looking at LLMs at this point is that they're a good tool as a partner to creative people.
Yeah.
They can write transcendental marketing copy.
Yeah, I used to refer to autocomplete on my phone as the best friend that could finish your sentences wrong. And LLMs came out, and I was like, now I have a good friend that can finish them right.
That's true. Exactly.
But it's still not replacing.
I mean, it definitely comes up with great ideas. Like, I gotta say,
It does.
I can sometimes the way I use the LLMs is I'll like come up with a strategy, a legal strategy, with all sorts of rationales and reason. And once I complete it, I'll feed the same prompts into an LLM and get an output there, and see whether I miss things or whether I under or overemphasize something. And oftentimes I'll learn something that it gives me. You know, it's actually pretty cool.
I agree. I think there's no question in my mind that it's helpful. But Josh and I, obviously this is where we live and breathe, is in sharing ideas, and whether it's podcasts or a lot of writing, and it's made both of us busier.
Yeah.
We're just and more productive.
Yeah, we're producing more faster. I mean, again, we have a lot of ideas to share, and maybe that's normal, maybe that's not. But for both of us, we don't experience anything but it being more, making us more busy, and being able to share more and communicate faster. It's almost like an economy where velocity of money versus, the idea of like percentage of taxes collected, and you're like, velocity matters, and there's sharing of good ideas. There's also the speed in which we share these ideas.
Yeah.
And I think what's happening for myself and Josh is the speed in which we share them is just at a greater rate.
Yeah, and I would say, like, as a writer, I don't think I've ever been blown away necessarily by the quality of the writing that an LLM has produced, and I certainly would never be tempted to try and use it as my own, but it's become an amazing brainstorming partner, and it's really good to help you organize information, come up with outlines, drafts, and things like that, and then sort of use them to build bigger writing projects.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there were just recently this productivity report that came out. I was reading the Wall Street Journal just today, how American workers are significantly more productive in the last year than they had been, and the economy, and there's very low unemployment. So we've actually become more productive, and we're still employing most people, and inflation is dipping. And so just like all of that is how strong the economy is. So if we can keep up by use of AI and other technologies, robotics, etc., higher productivity and still keep unemployment low, I mean, we're the holy grail.
Yeah.
Under the Copyright Act, code is a literary work. Equal to a book.
So subject to the same reviews, I guess, as you would like double check your code.
Well, first of all, there's a lot of great software for computer scientists that help finish code. So you can prompt and begin, and it continues. So coding and AI have become very good friends. The question I think that you're raising is, to what extent is that protectable? Like, what the software that's being generated, is that protectable because there's so much AI that's being used? And bottom line is, I don't think that question's really been answered yet. I don't think that the U.S. Copyright Office has even begun to appreciate how hard this is going to be. And it's another reason why I think they're rash decision to decide exactly how this before knowing is a bad idea.
Yeah. I mean, it's a crazy concept to think that if the LLM outputs code that it's not protected, and that you'd have to go through your code and highlight the areas that were you.
It's absurd.
Like, wow. Yeah. And then also that if you had it write code, that you could be infringing. Wow. Like the whole thing just is a cluster. But yeah, this was great. I feel like this conversation was overdue for us. We definitely have to do it again. There's more to cover. We like barely scratched the surface, but this was awesome.
Good. I'm glad you liked it. I really enjoyed it too. And thank you both for having me and for engaging in such a wonky legal conversation. I appreciate it.
We loved it, Ed. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks for hanging out with us again here on Invisible Machines. Don't forget to like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Always remember that you can watch this podcast too on our Invisible Machines YouTube channel. Head over to uxmag.com. We have a podcast page there where you can explore our back catalog and you can look at episodes centered around popular topics. Many, many thanks to our incredible production team here in the US and in Ukraine. Elias Parker, Michael Litvinov, Allison Harshberger, Alla Slesarenko, Vera Pokodkov, and Darina Moskovchuk. Till next week, Owagi.